Instead of focusing on winning arguments, we're teaching the basic fundamentals of sales and marketing and how we can use them to win in the world of politics, teaching you how to meet people where they're at on the issues they care about. Welcome to The Brian Nichols Show.
Well, happy Tuesday there, folks. Brian Nichols here on The Brian Nichols Show, and thank you for joining us on, of course, another fun-filled episode. I am, as always, your humble host, and today we have a nice returning guest who's joining us here on the program, talking about all the insanity happening in the world of modern monetary theory and more from FEE. But first, we're going to go ahead and give a shout out to today's sponsor, and that is Young Americans for Liberty, folks. If you want to go ahead and get out there and make a real opportunity to jump headfirst into the Liberty movement and make a real impact, well, Young Americans for Liberty is currently recruiting campaign field staff to help elect pro-liberty candidates across the country as part of Operation Win at the Door. These principled candidates are dedicated to fighting for gun rights, keeping our troops home, parental rights and education, criminal justice reform, ending our senseless spending, and many other winning liberty policies. And when I say winning, I mean it. Their work speaks for itself. These are the guys that passed constitutional carry in states like Indiana, Texas, and Alabama. They fought the lockdowns every step of the way, all while helping make liberty win. So you want to help make a difference and get liberty candidates elected across the country. If you want to be a part of the fight and actually make an impact in our insane political climate here in 2022, you can join one of these campaigns from now through November 8th. Gas-covered housing, fully provided, and you'll be compensated a total of $2,800 a month for your work on the campaign trail. So interested, head to briannicholsshow.com/YAL to apply and make a real change in this country today. That's briannicholsshow.com/YAL. Let's make liberty win. One more time, briannicholsshow.com/YAL. All right, folks. I teased his reappearance here on the program. So excited to have him. John Miltimore from FEE. Welcome back to the program.
Hey, good to be here with you, Brian. It's been a while.
Absolutely. John, thank you for returning to the show. It's been a little bit. We were talking beforehand. Last time you were on the show, I just got settled here, touchdown in Indiana. And I didn't have my studio set up yet. I was still working remotely from my laptop for our quote studio. So yeah, now we're settled in, and yet the world still is on fire, John. It still is on fire. I thought things were supposed to get better, but seemingly not. So you thankfully have been helping lead the amazing team over at FEE, fighting the good fight, and trying to restore some sanity when it comes to the conversation in the political world. Talk to us. What's been going on over at the world of the Foundation for Economic Education?
We're just trying to keep things glued together. No, really, it's the best of times. It's the worst of times. I think there's probably a lot of times in history when you can say that. There's some bad ideas out there going around, but I mean, at FEE, we're just trying to get people to understand the virtue of liberty and basic economics. I think if you look today, there not enough people study economics, not enough people really understand what it is. So we try to get people to understand those concepts, try to find creative ways to do it. We're really trying to get young people to take some interest in these ideas. These fundamental principles that are really important. There's ways to do that young people find interesting, through pop culture, through movies, through literature. So at FEE, we got some talented young people. A lot of your viewers probably already know, Brad Palumbo and Hannah Cox. I'm excited. We just our Hazlitt Fellowship. For those who don't know about it, it's a writing fellowship. For young people, young students, some recent college grads. We have a cohort right now that, I mean, I hate to, go into hyperbole, but they really knocked my socks off. I could not believe how talented and bright a lot of these, young folks were, that they don't just understand economic theory, but they've read it in and out. And their understanding of philosophy. At times it was daunting. I haven't read a lot of philosophy, since college. It's not something, one of those things that I don't go home and crack philosophy books, but just a really bright group of young people. So we're really excited about that.
Yeah, as you should be, because, and you know what? I saw this too. We just talked about our episode sponsor there, Young Americans for Liberty. I was down in Orlando, Florida, back at the beginning of August, and I got to see it firsthand too. 1,000+ young liberty activists. And to your point,
knowledgeable, not just about the issues, but specifically about the tenor of what the situation is right now, and being able to address the issues that truly matter, and really doing so in a way that meets people where they're at on the issues they care about. And that can be sometimes difficult, John, if we're going to be really transparent and honest here, when you're talking about something as fun as economics. Yeah, really exciting and enlightening. No, but truly, it is tough, right, to get people excited about that. And yet that's something you guys have been able to do. And let's talk about a few really important articles I think you guys have put out there over the past few weeks. One that actually was, I think, aired recently here over the past few days, and that's talking about modern monetary theory. Now, MMT, as it's more commonly known, really took off over the past few years, led by the folks out there like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, and more of the folks in that camp. But it really hasn't stood up to not just its own merits, but also to the basics of economics. So talk to us, John. What is it about MMT that had it doomed to fail at the onset?
Yeah, it's kind of funny because we joke that MMT is kind of like the flat earth theory in economics. Like you won't find hardly any, economists, virtually zero, that take the idea, seriously. It's kind of based on this idea that we really don't need to budget. The government can just print money. Like the government can't actually run out of dollars. You can always print more. The funny part was this theory actually started to gain steam, just a few years ago. And really, the author of that piece points out it was kind of one of the things that allowed the pandemic to happen. If you remember, the whole basis for the lockdowns was, well, we can just kind of print money, send checks to people and everything will be okay. I think if we didn't have the Federal Reserve doing what it is currently doing, we never would have had the lockdowns. It wouldn't have been on the table. So I think, MMT is kind of important in that respect. It's an idea that even though most, economists on both the right and the left, reject it, it's part of what we've seen here the last few years. And yeah, it has failed miserably. We've seen basic economics show exactly what we've been saying would happen happened. You have 30% of the dollars in circulation right now were printed in the last 18 months, 24 months, whatever it is. What's going to happen when you increase the money supply like that? Well, you get inflation, and that's what we've seen. And so, like, if you look, the Federal Reserve Board was just shocked by all this inflation. But there's a lot of people in our school of economics said, no, this is exactly what's going to happen. And we got new inflation numbers out today. They were really bad still.
They weren't good?
No, they were not good. Like if you look at it through the, August was a little lower than July. But what we're really seeing is Lawrence Summers just tweeted about this.
John, wasn't it 0% in July?
Yeah,
the Biden administration told me.
Exactly. You read these tweets, it's almost frightening when you see it. But yeah, Summers is a former president of Harvard, served as an economist in the Obama administration, and it was Treasury Secretary under Clinton. He just had a great tweet just saying these numbers, showing that inflation is really heating up when you stand back and look at it. And markets today reacted to that. I don't know if you're invested. Investors, first saw, even before the opening bell, stocks were tanking. Inflation's a really serious issue. And these schemes about, saying that we can just abolish student debt. Like these are the reasons that we have this inflation. You can't sit there. Discretionary, spending is a huge problem. Jerome Powell, to his credit, finally, he came out and said that. Again, it's like saying the sun is hot, but we need to get this spending under control, or these numbers are going to get worse, not better.
Yeah, well, and it goes back. We had Tho Bishop here in the show. We were talking about what happened to our money, and really what happened to our money was government. What did government do to our money? And you saw it was directly as an impact of the Fed and the results of the Federal Reserve going through, and in this case, over the past 2-3 years, especially printing, was it $7 trillion, some exorbitant number there. The money number just boggles the mind. It's beyond comprehension, and yet we've gotten so comfortable with it, which is the part that scares me. We're at $30 trillion, creeping up towards $31 trillion. And that just blows me away. I remember working on a congressional campaign all the way back in 2012, believe it or not. And the main concern, I think, was around $10 trillion at the time. And that was too much. And now we're over, 3 times where we were then. And that right there, not only is that not sustainable, but of course you're going to feel the pain. We're feeling that right now. Inflation, to your point, month after month has been consistently increased from where we were in the years past. And yet, I don't get it, John. A lot of folks still seem to want to continue down this path of MMT, or at the very least, leaning more towards this Keynesian approach to economics. And I just don't get it. Like, how long can you just pretend that what's happening is not happening as a direct result of the policies you've been promoting for years and years and years? The writing's on the wall. We have the results right before us. You can't just say it's the free market, it's things we can't control. No, it's literally your desire to control that has caused the problems we have today.
Yeah, I think that's why it's important to be, to acknowledge the economic pain. When you see this inflation, when you see negative, growth, domestic product, like, we got to be honest about that and not try to paper it over. Politicians are going to always do that, right? They're always going to try to make it, when our guy's in office, we're going to make it sound as rosy as possible. But it's real serious. But the pain is good. It's going to hopefully, have us try to correct some of these things. Can it be done? I'm not sure that there's really an appetite to do what's necessary. Time will tell. It's funny. I was never a monetary guy. Like, and most of us aren't. I think that's probably to your question. Why is this happening? People don't really want to pay attention to central banks, right? It's not where our attention is. We're to the extent that people are focused in ideas, it's probably more in the politics and stuff like that. But I recall, F.A. Hayek saying, many years ago, that history is largely a history of inflation. And I kind of thought, well, that's an economist, is he? But you realize he's right. And when the more you look at history, you realize all these nations that have come and gone, all these civilizations that have come and gone, a stunning number of them, it's because of monetary policy, because you had politicians that corrupted the currency. We got to make sure that we don't go that way.
Yeah. Well, and John, one of the problems, I think, too, is when you look at something like modern monetary theory, yeah, it might be, quote, modern and MMT, but it really has done nothing but revive a lot of old problems. And you're seeing that also carry over when you're talking about some solutions that are just as old as they were and as failed as they were back when they first came up. Price controls. You wrote an article over that. Talk to us about price controls. You have this article over, just aired, it was yesterday, over at FEE, how price controls have failed for 4,000 years, and yet we humans still haven't learned.
Yeah, what kind of sparked that initially for me was Axios had a piece that they published a few days ago that said 70s, price controls are back. And I was stunned to look at, you have all these leaders around the globe, including Janet Yellen, that are talking about imposing these price controls to try to curb, oil prices in Russia. And, it's funny. We have thousands of years that show, price controls fail. You can go back to ancient Mesopotamia before the Code of Hammurabi, actually, and see you had people trying to say, okay, this is a 1 shekel of silver can buy you this much grain, and 1 shekel of silver can buy you this much oil. And there's a reason the Babylonian Empire didn't last. I think price controls had a lot to do with it. But it's not just ancient Babylon. Like, you have we look at the Greeks in all the history they produced. They gave us the works of Homer and Sophocles. Well, you see in Athens, they had the same problem. Greece wasn't a huge, they didn't do a lot of farming there, and they had a highly regulated grain market, and it was riddled with price controls, and it caused all kinds of problems. In the price, the penalty, I should point out, for evading those price controls was death. And there was trials in like 388 BC talking about, because you had prices out of control, and they were going to try to blame a cartel that was kind of a legal cartel at the time for that. And so there's these famous trials. People know, I bet you a lot of listeners would know anyway, about the price controls in ancient Rome passed by Diocletian, that stretching across the empire. They were trying to impose price controls on everything you could, clothing, all kinds of food, even labor. We know that a lot today, right? Like, labor controls aren't just popular; they're kind of accepted around the country. The problem is price controls don't work, and we have tons of evidence that show that. The worst case scenarios are really severe. We look at the minimum wage and say, okay, we see some states that have a $15 minimum wage, and there's problems with that because it does lead to unemployment, for people that actually can produce the least amount of value. But it gets much worse than that. Just writing this article, I came across the famine of Bengal, which happened under the British Empire, and it's really just crazy to look at this famine. It killed an estimated 10 million people, and there's very little out there on the internet about it. Adam Smith did touch on it in The Wealth of Nations, and pointed out that sure, you had some monsoons, you had some droughts that kind of precipitated the shortage, but it was the price controls that led to this being a full-blown famine. And so if you look, again, this is something economists, there's very little disagreement on this. You don't see any sort of credible economists saying price controls are good, yet they're coming back in strange ways. And I think if we don't understand basic economics and that price controls only make matters worse, and understand why they make matters worse, right? Prices are signals. What do high prices do? They say, well, boy, I better conserve that, or maybe I shouldn't buy that or use that. That's one signal. What's the other signal? If there's high prices out there, it shows, it's really an incentive to produce things, right? To invest, to get stuff to market. High prices, they're a pain for consumers, but they can really help markets out. They're as one economics professor, I was told, like used to say in class, a friend of mine shared this with me, like high prices are the solution to high prices.
Well, you talk about basic economics and how important basic economics is for folks to understand. You know what else is important for folks to understand? Basic financial literacy. I always talk about this. Actually, we just talked about this recently here in a recent episode where we were talking about how, when we're talking about funding students and not systems, because there's a lot of folks out there who, they haven't had the chance to learn the very basics, and the education system isn't built to go out and actually teach kids this. So let's talk about what you guys are doing over at FEE to help solve that gap and fill that gap. And that is helping educate folks on financial literacy. John, what's that about?
Yeah, no, it's very exciting. Like, I can kind of talk about it now. It's been in the works for a little while. We have a new project called the Heroes Project. And basically it's all geared toward financial literacy for young people. I can say when I was young, I didn't really know very well how interest worked, right? Like you kind of know like the basics of compound interest. But, I think a lot of the problems we see today is because young people don't have any understanding, right? They take out massive, college loans, don't really think about, how much they're going to pay on those loans in the long term. But that's just one thing. You have all these ways that, there's ways to make money. In a lot of this, I think FEE's approach to this is what I really like. We're trying to do it. It's not all about like how to make money. It shows like simple ways to do this, like through your habits, right? A lot of there was one writer I spoke to about this, and in his first, reaction was, well, he didn't want to really write about financial literacy as much as he wanted to write about emotional literacy, because he said you can't have financial literacy without emotional literacy. And his point is that so much about this is like just finding good habits in our lives, cultivating good habits. And it is like, and it's other things like just understanding how to create passive income in your life, right? Like there's a lot of times like we have some capital. What do? You can put that and buy something that you use right away, or you can kind of, put some capital together and find ways to buy things that are going to produce income for you over the long term. And I just think there's not a lot of, people young or old in our country that really think about this stuff. There are some, right? Those are the entrepreneurs. Those are the people that are always, kind of the backbone of our country, bringing things to us that make our lives better. But really, it's to me an exciting project because finding creative ways to promote financial literacy and get people thinking about it, to me is just it's a great opportunity.
Amen. Well, John, I can't thank you enough for not only joining us here in the show, but also all the amazing work you and your team over at FEE are doing. And now it's the time of the show I like to talk about our final thoughts for the audience for the week. Now, my final thoughts are this, folks. At the end of the day, we talked about this in the past. We're not selling an idea, a product, a service, basic economics, but rather we're trying to help sell change. In this case, we're trying to help change people from where they've been, either A, in this old status quo apathetic mentality, or B, more in this leftist, more Keynesian approach to economics. Now, who are we going to have better chance of actually going after and winning over? It's going to be the folks who are more apathetic. So instead of just trying to convince other people that they're wrong with their opinions, let's start talking to the folks who are maybe starting to ask some questions, and let's start answering those questions with some common sense solutions. Now, folks, if you are getting value from what we're doing here at the Brian Nichols Show, showing how to have these different conversations, well, I'm going to ask you to do me a favor as well. Please head to briannicholsshow.com/support. You can help support us financially 2 different ways. Number 1, become a super fan. $5 a month over on our Patreon. You get quarterly, or rather monthly Q&As with yours truly. Also, you get to help support the show on a monthly basis, and I definitely appreciate that. But also, if you want to go ahead instead and make a one-time PayPal donation, you can do that as well. $5, $20, $100. It doesn't matter. Whatever you can do, I greatly appreciate it, because it goes into the Brian Nichols Show, so we can have more folks like John, and be able to have John come on the show, talk about the amazing work that he's doing over at FEE. So, folks, if that's something you get value out of, well, I would love to see your value in terms of some value. So briannicholsshow.com/support. John, final thoughts you have here for the audience today.
Yeah, I'd encourage everybody to check out our work at fee.org. That's FEE.org. You'll find, some of my writing there, but you'll find a lot of other things, articles, but also some great videos. We put together a really talented team, and we're going to have a lot more voices on there. Like I said, we have 8 new Hazlitt Fellows that I'm really excited about. Bright minds. And I guess my parting thought is sort of something that we've been talking about at FEE. Like the world it feels like it's a mess sometimes, and we I think a lot of people in our movement are trying to find good ways to make the world better. And I think what we're talking about at FEE is for me really inspirational. If you want to make the world better, make yourself better. And that's something our founding father, Leonard Read, who was a founder of FEE, really stressed. It's in a lot of his writings, which you can find on our website. And it is this idea, if you want to make the world better, work to yourself. What can I do first? How can I be a better learner? How can I be a better teacher? How well do I really know the ideas that I think I know? And for me, that's been a challenge. It was kind of like a little convicting, saying what, we want to be lifelong learners in liberty, and in philosophy and economics. And that means kind of like continuing to push yourself, learn. And I think by doing that, that's really the key to our movement. I think that's how we're going to be the best evangelists for liberty, and get people to see that these ideas are important, and that other track is a dangerous one.
Be a better learner, not a letter burner. I can't agree more, John. All right. With that being said, talk to us. Where can folks go ahead and follow you over on social media? Want to continue the conversation?
You can find me on Twitter. Miltimore79 is my handle. That's where I am most. I think if you look at social media, it's the place to be for me. I don't know. Twitter's a lot of fun. I'm happy to follow back any listeners and have, and to talk to some of your fans over there.
Awesome. All right. Well, folks, if you enjoyed today's episode, do me a solid. Go ahead, give it a share. And when you do, make sure you tag John, and please go ahead and tag yours truly as well at B Nichols Liberty. Also, folks, by the way, did you go ahead and give us a 5-star rating and review yet? If not, well, no worries. Head to briannicholsshow.com/reviews. Give us a quick 5-star rating and review. If you're doing that because you heard us talk today about that on John's episode, make sure you go ahead and give him a mention as well over in the review, and I'll make sure I go ahead and share it to him as well. And by the way, folks, if you were trying to catch all those different social media handles, don't worry. If you're on the podcast version of the show, all you got to do is click the artwork in your podcast catcher. It'll bring you right over to briannicholsshow.com, where you can find today's episode, John's social media links, the entire transcript from today's episode. You can have the video version of the show as well. Plus, we have it over on Odyssey. And by the way, all 582 other episodes of the program. And by the way, speaking of other episodes of the program, did you catch my episode yesterday where I went ahead? It was you and me, and we talked about call scripting 101. I actually showed you some of the call scripting I use when I'm doing my sales calls for my day job. So if you want to go ahead and give that a check, because I promise you can use it not just if you're in the world of sales, if you're an entrepreneur, even if you're in the world of politics, believe it or not, call scripting
is important. So I'll go ahead. If you're here on YouTube, I'll include that for you right here below. Otherwise, you can go ahead and find it over at BrianNicholsShow.com. But with that being said, it's Brian Nichols signing off here on the Brian Nichols Show. For John Miltmore from Fee, we'll see you tomorrow.
For listening to the Brian Nichols Show. Find more episodes at BrianNicholsShow.com.